There was a reason midnight mattered when I was deep in witchcraft. And it wasn't because the clock struck something mystical or magical. It was because people changed after 12 a.m. Their guard dropped, their thoughts slowed, their emotions surfaced. Midnight wasn't about darkness, it was about vulnerability. I wasn't always on this side of the truth. I lived in the occult long enough to recognize patterns most people never notice. And one pattern was consistent. The hours after midnight exposed what the day kept hidden. Fear, regret, loneliness, unresolved grief, those things didn't disappear when people lay down. They got louder. We used to say that after 12 a.m., people stop performing and start revealing. The noise of the day is gone. Distractions are quiet. And what's left is whatever you carried into the night. That's why midnight was strategic, not because of power in the hour, but because of honesty in the heart. I remember watching people who seemed strong all day unravel after midnight. Anxiety would spike. Old memories resurfaced. Sleep became restless. Minds replayed conversations they couldn't fix. And when people are tired, they stop filtering thoughts. They stop resisting emotions. They stop pretending they're okay. That's what shocked me later, after I left that life and began to understand truth. The real battle after midnight wasn't supernatural spectacle. It was internal exposure. Most believers think if they prayed in the morning and pushed through the day, they were covered. But nights tell a different story. What you believe about yourself, what you fear about tomorrow, what you regret from yesterday. Midnight has a way of bringing all of that to the surface. Let me be clear before we go further. This message is not meant to scare you. Midnight is not cursed. The clock does not control your life, but patterns matter. And what happens consistently after 12 a.m. reveals what's unresolved. If you've noticed restlessness, racing thoughts, emotional heaviness, or a sense of unease that appears mostly at night, this is not about condemnation, it's about clarity. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain why the mind becomes so vulnerable after midnight, what actually shifts internally, and why understanding this hour changes how you experience sleep, peace, and rest. Stay with me. Awareness is where freedom begins. Let me explain what actually happens after midnight. It's not that a spiritual switch flips. It's that your body and brain enter a different state. During the day, your mind is occupied. Conversations, responsibilities, screens, notifications, movement, all of it keeps your thoughts outward. You're reacting, you're solving, you're responding. But after 12 a.m., especially if you're still awake, the stimulation drops. The house is quiet, messages stop coming in, the world slows down. And when external noise decreases, internal noise increases. When I was in the occult, we paid attention to patterns of vulnerability. Late night hours consistently revealed the same things in people overthinking, regret spirals, fear about the future, emotional loneliness, temptation, impulsive decisions, not because midnight has power, but because exhaustion weakens emotional defenses. After 12 a.m., your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thinking and self-control, is tired. Your emotional brain is more active. That means fear feels bigger, loneliness feels deeper, problems feel heavier. That's why arguments often escalate at night. That's why bad decisions are frequently made after midnight. That's why anxiety spikes when you're staring at the ceiling in the dark. Fatigue amplifies emotion. And here's what shocked me after leaving that life. Many people interpret this emotional amplification as something external attacking them, when in reality it's often unprocessed, thoughts finally surfacing. Midnight exposes what you avoided at noon. If you suppressed stress all day, it shows up at night. If you ignored grief, it knocks after midnight. If you distracted yourself from insecurity, the silence will introduce you to it. And because it happens in darkness and exhaustion, it feels overwhelming. We used to say that night reveals the cracks in a person's foundation. Not to harm them, but to understand them. If someone consistently unraveled after midnight, it meant there was something unresolved beneath the surface. You cannot outrun what waits for you in quiet. That's why people who are constantly busy often struggle most at night. When productivity stops, identity questions surface. When movement stops, emotions speak. The hour after midnight is not mystical, it's revealing. And if you're experiencing heaviness during that time, the answer isn't panic, it's awareness. Ask yourself, what thoughts visit me after 12 a.m. that I refuse to face during the day? What fears grow louder when the lights go out? What patterns repeat in my mind at night? Because repetition reveals roots. In the next chapter, I'm going to talk about the specific mental and emotional patterns that intensify after midnight and why understanding them is the key to breaking the cycle instead of fearing the hour. Midnight doesn't create problems, it exposes them, and exposure is the first step toward freedom. After midnight, the same patterns show up again and again. Different faces, different stories, but the same roots. When I was in the occult, we didn't fear the late hours. We observed them because patterns reveal what a person truly struggles with. The first pattern was replay. Conversations people wish they had handled differently. Arguments, embarrassing moments, missed opportunities. After midnight, the mind becomes a theater. Scenes loop, words echo. And because you're tired, you don't challenge the narrative, you just relive it. Replay feeds regret, and regret steals rest. The second pattern was catastrophizing. Small concerns during the day become massive threats at night. A minor financial worry turns into imagined disaster. A health concern becomes worst case scenarios. A delayed text message becomes rejection. Darkness magnifies uncertainty. When you can't see your surroundings clearly, your imagination fills in the gaps. The third pattern was loneliness amplification. Even people who are not lonely during the day feel isolated at night. The silence makes absence louder. The bed feels bigger. The room feels emptier. And emotional needs surface that were buried under activity. That's when people reach for unhealthy coping mechanisms, not because they're reckless, but because they want relief. The fourth pattern was identity doubt. After midnight, when achievements and roles are stripped away, a deeper question surfaces. Who am I really? Without work titles, without social masks, without daily performance. That question unsettles people more than they admit. And finally, there was spiritual anxiety. People suddenly questioning their future, their purpose, their salvation, their direction. Not because truth changed at midnight, but because silence forces reflection. Here's what's important to understand. None of these patterns are supernatural attacks. They are unresolved thoughts amplified by exhaustion. When I left the occult, I had to confront my own midnight patterns. I had replay. I had regret. I had identity confusion. And I realized something powerful. Midnight wasn't my enemy. Avoidance was. Everything that surfaced at 12 a.m. had been ignored at 12 p.m. If you only deal with life while you're distracted, your mind will demand attention when you're alone. That's why some people fear going to bed. Not because of the hour, but because of what their thoughts might say. But here's the shift that changes everything. Midnight is not exposing you to destroy you. It's exposing you to refine you. When regret surfaces, it's an invitation to forgive. When fear surfaces, it's an invitation to confront. When loneliness surfaces, it's an invitation to connect in healthier ways. When identity doubt surfaces, it's an invitation to anchor yourself in something deeper than performance. The hour itself holds no power, but the patterns it reveals hold information. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain why resisting midnight thoughts makes them stronger, and how to respond in a way that breaks the cycle instead of feeding it. Because you don't defeat midnight by fighting the clock. You transform it by changing how you respond in the quiet. This is where most people get stuck, and it's where I stayed trapped for years. When the thoughts come after midnight, the instinct is to fight them, to force sleep, to distract harder, to grab the phone, turn on noise, scroll endlessly, or mentally argue with every fear that surfaces. But here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. Resistance without understanding strengthens the cycle. When you try to shut your mind down aggressively, you signal danger to your nervous system. Your body interprets urgency as threat. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes shallow. The brain releases stress hormones. And suddenly, the thoughts feel louder, faster, and more convincing. We saw this pattern constantly. People who panicked at midnight spiraled faster. People who feared their thoughts became trapped in them. People who tried to overpower exhaustion with willpower stayed awake longer. Midnight doesn't respond to force, it responds to posture. I remember being taught something chilling when I was still in the occult. The most effective influence is never confrontation, it's escalation through fear. If a person believes something is wrong, their mind will search for proof. And at night, imagination provides plenty. That's why telling yourself, I have to sleep now, often backfires. That's why saying, I can't think about this, makes the thought stronger. You're not weak for struggling after midnight. You're tired, and a tired mind needs gentleness, not battle. When I finally stopped fighting my midnight thoughts, something unexpected happened. They lost intensity, not immediately, but consistently. I stopped treating them like emergencies and started treating them like signals. Signals of unmet needs, signals of unresolved emotions, signals of limits I had ignored during the day. Midnight thoughts often sound urgent, but they are rarely accurate. Fear says, this must be solved now. Wisdom says, this can wait. Learning that distinction changed everything. Instead of wrestling with every thought, I began acknowledging them without obeying them. I see you, instead of I believe you. This is fatigue, instead of this is truth. That separation gave me back authority. You don't need answers at 12:30 a.m. You need grounding, slow breathing, stillness, releasing the demand to fix tomorrow tonight. This is where many people accidentally turn midnight into a battleground when it was meant to be a boundary. A boundary that says the day is over. When you stop trying to control the hour stops controlling you. In the final chapter, I'm going to show you how to redeem the hour after midnight, how to turn it from a place of anxiety into a place of surrender, clarity, and rest, not by fighting your thoughts, but by responding to them correctly. Because midnight only has power over what you refuse to face in the light. And once you learn that, the fear attached to that hour begins to fade. This is where everything changes, and it's simpler than most people expect. Midnight stops being a threat the moment you stop treating it like an enemy. After I left the occult, I had to relearn how to respond to the hour that once unsettled me, not by controlling it, not by fearing it, but by redeeming it. And redeeming the hour didn't mean doing something dramatic. It meant changing my posture. Here's the truth most people never hear. Midnight is not demanding answers. It's asking for surrender. All the thoughts that rush in after 12 a.m. share one thing in common. They want control. They want certainty. They want resolution now. And because you're exhausted, your mind believes the urgency, but exhaustion lies. Nothing important is decided well after midnight. Fear feels convincing at night because your strength is low, not because the fear is true. That realization alone removes much of its power. The turning point for me came when I stopped engaging midnight thoughts as problems to solve and started responding to them as signals to release. When regret surfaced, I practiced forgiveness instead of replay. When fear rose, I postponed decisions. When loneliness showed up, I chose connection in healthy ways the next day instead of impulsive relief at night. I learned to tell myself one sentence that changed everything. This thought belongs to daylight. And then I rested. Rest is not avoidance, it is trust. When you intentionally choose rest after midnight, you are declaring that fear does not get the final word. You are acknowledging your limits, and limits are not weakness, they are wisdom. Here's what happens when you redeem the hour consistently. Your nervous system learns safety again. Your mind stops rehearsing disaster. Your body releases tension instead of storing it. Your sleep becomes deeper and more restorative. And slowly, the hour that once produced anxiety becomes neutral, sometimes even peaceful. Midnight loses its mystery when it loses its fear. I want to say this clearly before we close. If you struggle after 12 a.m., there is nothing wrong with you. You are not spiritually failing. You are human. And your mind is asking for care, not combat. The greatest lie I believed in my old life was that power comes from control. The truth I discovered later is that peace comes from surrender. So tonight, if you find yourself awake after midnight, don't panic. Don't analyze every thought. Don't demand solutions. Breathe, release, rest. Tell yourself the day is finished and tomorrow will meet you when it comes. Midnight does not define you. Your fears do not own you. Your thoughts are not commands. When you respond to the hour with gentleness instead of resistance, the cycle breaks, and what once felt heavy becomes quiet. That is what really happens after 12 am, not attack, not darkness, but exposure, inviting you to lay down what you were never meant to carry alone. And once you do, midnight finally becomes what it was always meant to be, a doorway into rest.